Bernstein.
Poor little drummer boy that I am. They are drumming me out of my prison cell. They are leading me where? If I had only remained a drummer boy, I would never have been in prison. Oh, gallows up there, my final resting place. The sight of you chills me. Gallows, I can no longer look at you because I know I belong to you. When the soldiers march by, they'll have nothing to do with me. When they ask who I was, I cry out to them, drummer boy of the Royal Guard, of the company of the King's own bodyguard. When they ask who I was, I tell them I was a little German, Czech, Moravian, Jewish, Polish, Austrian boy named Gustav Mahler. We were poor. My father made and sold cheap liquor, one of the few occupations permitted to Jews. He didn't like my mother very much, nor she him, but they were Orthodox. We sometimes went to the synagogue. I preferred the church. The music was better. It was by Rossini and Mozart, and I got to sing in the choir. I had 13 brothers and sisters. Now today, as I write this song, I have only 3. Both parents are dead. I am 40 years old and am yet to marry and have my own children. One of them will die before her time, as will I myself 10 years from now. Gute Nacht. Good night. Good night. Good night to all I have loved, nature, music, family, fame, shame. Why shame? Why guilt? My comrades pass and avert their eyes. Comrades, I leave you. For what am I being punished? If I had only remained a little drummer boy, is that it? Gute Nacht. Good night. But what was my crime?
Gustav Mahler was born 125 years ago. In celebration, Leonard Bernstein has written this television essay on the man and his music. He highlights two distinct, but as he'll show, interrelated themes. First is the inspiration which Mahler drew for both songs and symphonies from the collection of German folk poems known as Des Knaben Wunderhorn, the youth's magic horn. The second is a subject little discussed by other writers on Mahler, the influence of his Jewish origins in his music. The essay, which was recorded in Israel and later in London, is punctuated by biographical interludes, and is illustrated by musical examples drawn from the cycle of Mahler's works, recorded by Leonard Bernstein over the past 15 years. The distinguished soloists taking part include Christa Ludwig in the Song of the Earth, Janet Baker in the Second Symphony, Edith Mattis in the Fourth Symphony, and in the Youth's Magic Horn, Lucia Popp and Walton Groenroos. The orchestras are the Vienna Philharmonic, which was filmed in the Große Musikvereinssaal, where Mahler himself conducted them, the London Symphony Orchestra, filmed in Ely Cathedral, and the Israel Philharmonic, performing in Tel Aviv, where Mr. Bernstein's essay begins.
Perhaps it's because I happen to be in Israel, but the music of Gustav Mahler sounds, to me anyway, more Jewish than ever, or should I say than usual. What on earth do I mean by the phrase Jewish music? Is there such a thing? Many people think so, mainly Jewish people. And I now seem to be running the same risk of participating in their generalizing, and I don't generally like to generalize. I remind myself of the old joke: if a Frenchman were writing a doctoral dissertation on the elephant, he would call it, with typical French precision, a l'éléphant. If a German were writing the same paper, he might entitle it Die Geschichte der Elefanten vor der Urzeit bis 20. Jahrhundert historisch betrachtet und so weiter. Whereas a Jewish doctoral candidate would undoubtedly write The Elephant and the Jewish Problem. I hope I'm not similarly pushing this point about Mahler, but I'm pretty sure it's not just the fact of being in Israel to which I owe this particular bout with musical ethnology. There is indeed something arguably Jewish in Mahler's music, I think, and I also think it's worth a few minutes to try to find out what it may be. For example, take the famous moment from Mahler's First Symphony, that mock funeral march, the third movement, which is based on the children's round Frère Jacques, only in this case, ironically thrust into the minor mode. You recognize it? Now, in the middle of this unlikely funeral, there suddenly appears what even more ironically sounds like a Jewish wedding.
Jewish sounding about that? Well, I could answer the very irony itself. So Kafka-like, so deeply enjoying its own suffering. But that doesn't tell us much about the music. What of the notes themselves? Well, obviously, there's no such thing as a Jewish B-flat or a C-sharp. Notes by themselves are perfectly neutral. But in this combination, there is undeniably a trace of Gypsy or Hungarian or even Arabic, Moorish, in the use of that harmonic minor scale. To say nothing of the constant flirting between minor and major modes, so typical of Slavic music. Major, you see. And that's one of Mahler's trademarks, as is his use of other archaic modes, like the Oriental-sounding Phrygian mode, which is distinguished among all other modes for being the only one to have an initial half step, this half step, from which so much weepy, waily, Arabic, Moorish, Spanish music, flamenco music has derived. Later on in this same funeral march movement, Mahler uses the Phrygian mode like this. You hear it? That's the note that counts. That's the weepy, waily Phrygian. But again, we have to ask, why is all that specifically Jewish rather than Gypsy plus Arabic plus Hungarian plus Slavic plus whatever? Well, it must be precisely that whatever, that mysterious ethnic flavor of this extraordinary international borscht, this product of centuries of wandering, exile, adapting, readapting, assimilating, dissimulating, in a word, diaspora. I hear a sob in this music, as I hope you two are beginning to hear, a strangled sigh that simply sounds Jewish. Not Judaistic, not Hebrew, not Israeli, but Jewish in the most universal sense.
What you're hearing now is not a lush orchestration of By Mir Bist Du Schön, minus the Andrews sisters, but rather one of the most moving lyrical passages from Mahler's Fifth Symphony.
There's a striking parallel to be made between this kind of musical Yiddishkeit and the so-called Yiddish language, which again is not strictly a language, but rather a compendium of linguistic influences overlying a base of Middle High German. An Eastern European Jew, for instance, wanting to say, please close the window, might say, vermach bitte das Fenster, whereas an American Yiddish speaker would probably say, vermach the window, please. It is a kind of borscht or goulash, but it is recognizable. Similarly, Mahler's highly original music is basically the German or Austrian language inherited from Bach and Mozart and Schubert and Bruckner, but sometimes overlaid with echoes of the diaspora, bittersweet communal memories of being strangers in so many lands throughout so many centuries. Please notice that I say sometimes overlaid with these ethnic echoes, because for the most part, Mahler's music comes to us as the last great chapter in the history of the Austro-German symphony, in a voice as truly individual and authentic delicate balance we're talking about, and perhaps a simpler way to perceive that balance might be to view Mahler through his songs, many of which turn out to be the very core, the seeds and roots of his gigantic symphonies. Here in Israel, in this biblically ravishing month of May, we are in the course of performing a dozen of these songs, specifically Mahler's orchestral settings of poems from this extraordinary book called The Youth's Magic Horn, or Des Knaben Wunderhorn, which is an anthology of thousands of German folk poems dating back to medieval times. These poems range widely in subject matter as well as in dialects from every far corner of German-speaking Europe. Naturally, therefore, some of these poems will seem more German, so to speak, than others, and Mahler's music follows suit.
Here, Mahler is writing pure Bavarian milkmaid music. But only moments later, he is screaming out the cruelest, most relentless war march I have ever heard. Then, in one of the most touching of the songs, we hear the pain of this reluctant warrior's desolate sweetheart. And suddenly there's a low comedy number, satirizing critics, but disguised as a barnyard fable. And then a song of country bumpkin flirtation on the very brink of bad taste. And now, at one quick hearing, no one would say that there's anything particularly Jewish in those songs. Well, perhaps not, although I could find you a flick or two here and there, but let's not quibble. Here is one from the same cycle that I feel has a distinctly Jewish flavor from beginning to end. It's called Das irdische Leben, or the earthly life. And I think you'll agree with me that the flavor comes partly from the Phrygian element. Remember the Phrygian mode? And partly for other reasons, which I'm sure you'll hear for yourselves. has a Jewish flavor? Apart from the Phrygian element and the constant chromatic wailing, apart from all that, it's a peculiarly Mahlerian portrait of poverty, starvation, the widowed mother dealing with the problems of her hungry child. I say Mahlerian because through him the abject, lonely, poverty-stricken situation comes to us as from the ghetto, because the ghetto was Mahler's connection with poverty, starvation, and loneliness. See? So much for the earthly life. Now I'd like you to listen to its spiritual opposite, a song from the same cycle called The Heavenly Life, das himmlische Leben, which indeed arises from the same poverty, starvation, and all the assorted ailments that beset the people of Central Europe during the endless centuries of reformational wars. Only this is the other side of that coin. That same starving child's vision of what it's going to be like in heaven, and all expressed in his own totally Christian, childlike terms. Naturally, it's mostly about food. In heaven, there is no end to the number of fish that come swimming down the street to be caught by St. Peter in his very own net, nor is there any shortage of meat. St. John himself brings the little lamb to be slaughtered with not a trace of shame or sense of sin. What you are now hearing is not only a song from this Knaben Wunderhorn, but a song which turns out, through Mahler's magic, to constitute the entire final movement of his Fourth Symphony. Not a fleck of Jewishness anywhere, musical or otherwise, but the tender poetry that flows from the innocent faith of this child's mind is, oddly enough, not unlike the grim poetry that issues from the mind of another young boy whom we met earlier in this program. Remember the little drummer boy being led to the gallows to expiate an unnamed crime? They are both the same little boy. In fact, they are one with the other little boy we heard pleading with his mother for bread. And all three boys are named Gustav Mahler. What can possibly unite three such disparate creatures? Well, fear of death, expiation, longing for the state of grace, Christian forgiveness. But forgiveness for what? For what crime? What was Mahler's crime?
Gustav Mahler naît le 7 juillet 1860 ici, dans le minuscule village de Kalist. Peu après, toute la famille émigre vers la ville voisine de Iglau, à quelques 160 km de Prague. C'est là qu'il grandit. Sa mère, Marie, est la gentillesse même, raconte-t-il. Elle s'est soumise à un mariage arrangé, sans amour. Son mari, Bernard Mahler, un énergique commerçant qui s'est fait lui-même, fabrique des boissons bon marché qu'il vend dans la maison familiale. Les talents musicaux de Gustave se révèlent très tôt. Je faisais de la musique, se souviendra-t-il plus tard, et composais dès ma 4e année, avant même d'être capable de faire des gammes. Quant au reste, j'ai perdu ma jeunesse à l'école, rien appris. Il donne son premier récital de piano à 10 ans dans ce petit théâtre. Un journal relate le succès que le futur virtuose s'est taillé auprès du public. À 15 ans, Mahler est à Vienne, cœur de l'Empire autrichien, où il étudie pendant 2 ans au conservatoire, installé dans le Musikverein que l'on vient de construire. Là, il tombe sous le charme de Bruckner, qui, dira-t-il, influença son développement comme artiste et comme homme. Il passe les 2 années suivantes à l'université, avant de se lancer dans sa fulgurante carrière de chef d'orchestre. Celle-ci commence dans de petits théâtres de province, un été à Bad Hall, 2 ans à Ljubljana, puis Olmütz pour quelques mois, puis Kassel, et viennent alors des postes plus importants. 2e chef au théâtre allemand de Prague, puis, hors de l'Empire autrichien, assistant du grand Nikisch à Leipzig, et enfin à 28 ans, son premier poste majeur, directeur de l'Opéra Royal de Budapest. 3 ans et demi plus tard, il déménage pour Hambourg, où il va passer 6 ans, durant lesquels il dirige également à Londres, Berlin et Moscou. Des années pendant lesquelles le public commence à entendre ses propres compositions. Mais les exigences de sa profession de chef d'orchestre sont telles qu'il ne trouve le temps de composer que pendant les vacances d'été. À Steinbach, à Mattersee, près de Salzbourg, il fait construire une petite maison où il peut écrire en toute tranquillité. C'est là qu'il compose plusieurs lieder du Knabenwunderhorn. Enfin, en 1897, les ambitions de Mahler le ramènent à Vienne, vers le poste le plus important du monde musical, directeur de l'Opéra de Vienne.
Gustav Mahler was not only a great symphonist, but also one of the mightiest dramatic minds of the last 100 years. No one I know actually heard him conduct opera during his golden age at the Vienna State Opera, but many people I know have known people who did, and they are unanimous in agreeing that Mahler delivered the finest and most dramatic Aidas, Fidelios, Figaros, and Tannhäusers. As a matter of fact, Mahler's debut in 1897 at the Vienna Opera happened to be Tannhäuser, for which he was rewarded by one newspaper critic describing his performance as Tannhäuser with a Jewish accent. Does that give you some idea of the times in which Mahler lived? And do you think I am belaboring this point? But I digress. Mahler the dramatist is at least equally striking in his own compositions. Every one of his symphonies behaves like an opera. I don't know any composer who had so keen a sense of how to begin a movement, you can practically see the curtain going up, or how to end a movement, or how to deliver shock after shock, contrast after hyperbole after understatement, or a composer who understood so brilliantly and effectively the dramatic possibilities of ambiguity. And perhaps this dramatic gift also has something to do with his Jewishness, if you'll pardon me, with the Talmudic quality of his dualistic mind, his rabbinical either-or. And we have already witnessed some examples of Mahler's riveting sense of drama in the few songs from the Knabenwunderhorn cycle we've been hearing. But this is as nothing compared to Mahler's use of these songs within his symphonies. And probably the most dramatic use of them is to be found in his gigantic second symphony, known as the Resurrection Symphony. In this work, there are 2 songs used contiguously, out of which the entire third and fourth movements are fashioned. These 2 songs couldn't be more opposite in quality or contrasting in tone. The first being a humorous fable about St. Anthony of Padua preaching a sermon to the fish. And this naturally becomes the scherzo, which is traditionally the witty or playful movement of a classical symphony. The other song is entitled Urlicht, meaning primeval light, or the original source of light, and deals again, though in a slightly different way, with that child's view of the heavenly life that we have come to be familiar with. We're going to hear both of these songs sung, as well as hearing the incredible scherzo that Mahler metamorphosed out of that cute fish sermon by St. Anthony. In the same folksy way that the text unwinds, the music too begins very rustically by setting up a simple vamp. But with these piquant little pinches and prickles, and using this little grace note effect, as in country bagpipe music. So you see, it's not quite so simple as we thought. And on top of that, Mahler starts a kind of swimming accompaniment line. I suppose representing the fish to whom poor Anthony has gone to preach because nobody had shown up at his sermon. And on top of all that comes the vocal line, which will speak for itself.
Geht zu den Füßen und glänzen im Sonnenschein, Sonnenschein, glänzen, sie glänzen, sie glänzen, glänzen. Die Karpfen mit Rogenheit all ihre erzogen, hat Mäuler aufbliesen, sich Buhen bebliesen. Kein Predigt niemalen, den Fischen so fallen. Die immer so fechten, die Seilen verschwommen, zu hören den Trommen, auch jene Fantasten, die immer zu fassen, die stoffisch, ich meine, zur Predigt erscheinen. Kein Predigt niemanden, den stoffisch von allen. Tale und Tausen, die ohne Schmausen, die selbst sich bequemen, die Predigt anhören, auf kreblichen Tropen, sonst langsame Booten, steigen eilig vom Thron, zu hören diesen Ton. Kein Predigt niemanden, den Fremden zu fallen, bis große, bis kleine, vornehm und gemeine, erheben die Köpfe, wie verständige Geschöpfe. Auf Gottes Begehren, die Predigt anhören. Sich wendet. Die Hefte bleiben Liebe, die alle viel lieben, die Predigt hat alles, die bleiben wie alle, die Christen zurück, die Stoff ist ein Sitte, die Karpfen viel fressen, die Predigt vergessen, vergessen. Die Predigt hat allen, sie bleiben wie alle, die Predigt hat fallen, hat fallen.
Now to the Metamorphosis, the symphonic version, the scherzo. No folksy intro now, but rather those same notes of the vamp, now banged out by the timpani. You see what I meant about his knack for knowing how to start a movement. Then on he goes with the spiky counterpoint, the bagpipe music, and the swimming accompaniment, this time with an amazing effect of a crescendo, crescendo, crescendo to nothing. And as you listen, you'll notice lots more of these wild contrasts, which are at the very heart of Mahler's dramatic genius. Notice how the jokiness of the song with its comedy text has now been transformed in this purely instrumental version into an ironic absolute, the very essence of irony. Now comes a whole string of cross relations, E-flats pitted against E naturals, major against minor, the old Phrygian mode, all those familiar Jewish touches. Now, if that isn't Jewish, I'll eat it. More cross relations, more ironic wrong notes, black humor. Now comes the vocal line, but much spikier than before because it's in 3 octaves at once, bassoon, clarinet, and piccolo. Now listen for an even more sardonic twist, a diabolical shriek on the little E-flat clarinet. And now the symphonic Mahler takes over. And we have a whole new section, a contrapuntal development of that swimming pattern from the song's introduction. And over it, he develops a whole series of smoothly flowing melodies. Now a further development of the opening material. The timpani beats, the swimming department, and the vocal line, but all now made staccato, prickly. Like those grace notes in the flute. One has the feeling that the movement is reaching its end here, but no, not with the giant Mahler in charge. You see, a new middle section, or trio, has started in a very Bach-like style. Why Bach? Never mind, I'll tell you later. Sorry we were interrupted by a heavenly proclamation of trumpets. I was just asking, why Bach in the midst of all this black irony? Because Bachian contrapuntal exercises are about as far as you can get from Jewishness. Oops, sorry, here come those heavenly proclamations again, and a whole tone higher. Where are we now? We're in the real trio section. You thought you'd been through the contrasting inner sections, but no, Mahler is in charge. And this one is the ultimate contrast. Totally sweet, totally legato, totally sentimental, and slightly corrupt. How lovely it is in heaven. Is this what St. Anthony has been preaching about? I guess so, say the fish. This could be our reward. Why, I could be the one caught by St. Peter and served for dinner. Where are we now? Back to Bach? Not with all these Jewish wrong notes coming back. Where we are is back where we started, only with completely new orchestral decor, more sardonic than ever. Now for the triumphant return of that shrieking E-flat clarinet, for all the world like Shostakovich, who stole every one of his scherzos from this. And cross relations. And chromatic howling. A regular Phrygian festival. And now briefly back to that smooth development of the swimming music. But again, as always, with new costumes and new counterpoints. But wait, heaven's opening again. Only this time, it's like our last chance. Mahler is desperate. He's beating at the doors of heaven. He is fleeing from the devil until with one shocking, discordant scream, he lets us fall back into the pain of earthly life. But the consolation of Christian heaven is still there, this time in the form of a mystical summons by two angelic trumpets. And once again, and what was that new interruption? We thought we were listening to angelic trumpets, but no. It's Mahler saying, nothing is as simple as it sounds. Will he never finish? Yes, this time he is going to finish. But it won't seem like the end, and in a moment you'll see why. Because at this extraordinary moment, up stands this beautiful lady and sings this unbelievable song. Little red rose, O bleeding heart of Jesus. are back in the world of Mahler the little boy of the Wunderhorn, musing on the pain of this earthly life and dreaming of the glorious, peaceful one to come. And now the most amazing thing happens. Mahler hurls us violently back to that same shocking dissonance chord which erupted at the climax of the scherzo. He's repeating this desperate cry as if to say, but it's not that easy getting to heaven. There's all this agony still to be gotten through. Here again comes that heavenly summons, again from those two angel trumpets. And yet again. Why these constantly repeated summons, these gentle but incessant urgings? Why? Because those few glimpses of heaven we were permitted during the scherzo were obviously not enough. In fact, there still remains an enormous final movement which almost literally portrays the hopes, pains, and ultimate joys of Christian resurrection, the day of judgment, Gabriel's horn, and all. But even here, Mahler's origins reveal themselves, this time in the rather non-Christian form of sounding the ram's horn, or as it is called in Hebrew, the shofar. Those offstage horns we are hearing, sounding the call to judgment, are really only Mahler's version of the traditional shofar blowing. You see, Mahler constantly proclaimed his Christianity, but not quite loudly enough to drown out the Jewishness within. By now, I'm sure it has become clear to you what I've been suggesting all along, namely that the crime, that little drummer boy's unspecified crime, symbolizing the source of Mahler's need for expiation, that crime has something to do with his Jewishness, right? The term Jewishness, of course, represents many things. It is a tradition, a faith, a school of moral philosophy, an official religion based on the laws of Moses, plus the Talmud, plus the Kabbalah, plus a certain outlook conditioned by the collective ghetto experiences of millennia. Moreover, at the time of Mahler's birth, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire of the 1860s, Jewishness also meant being subject to a number of quite specific laws and regulations, not at all from the Mosaic Code, involving most aspects of daily life. For example, there was the so-called Familiengesetz, or family's law, which quite arbitrarily prescribed the maximum number of legal Jewish marriages, a number fixed for some reason at 8,600 for the whole of Bohemia. Now, when Gustav was 7 years old, that would be in 1867, certain civil liberties were at last granted to the emperor's Jewish subjects. But anti-Semitism, like any racial discrimination, can hardly be erased by mere legal fiat. And while Jews, particularly in the world metropolis of Vienna, became increasingly active in the empire's social, cultural, financial, and professional circles, the taint, as it were, of being a Jew remained, especially where a government post was concerned. To the degree that Gustav Mahler came to the point of denying his Jewish origins and converting to Catholicism for the sole purpose of getting the biggest job in the world of music, namely director of the Vienna State Opera. And that what's more, he lied about the timing of his conversion when he filled out his application for the position. He was what you might call a premature Christian. P.S. He got the job. Is there not a hint here, or even more than a hint, of Mahler's unnamed and, by him, unnameable crime? Shame, lying, cover-up. Are these not seeds of criminality? Especially when they lie buried deep in the earth of the unconscious, as was the case with Gustav Mahler. For instance, there is little or no evidence in letters or other written materials of any interest on his part in things Jewish. He seems rather to have avoided the subject. After all, he was living at the same time and in the same city as Theodor Herzl, the great pioneer of Zionism. Not a word from Gustav Mahler, pro or con. And so, as always, when seeking the deep truths about a composer, we must look for our evidence in the music. And this evidence is even clearer in the Third Symphony, Mahler's longest and most theatrical of all. His deeply buried repression of his Jewish sensibility springs up in this music like a sudden field of poppies. Just listen to this passage from the final movement. As though every day was Yom Kippur in Mahler's life, one long day of atonement. Atonement for what? Of what was he guilty? Why the breast beating? Of what is he ashamed? Answer, of being Jewish. But the far greater shame for him must have been his shame at being ashamed of being Jewish.
Avec le contrat de Mahler, l'Opéra de Vienne entame une de ses plus brillantes décennies. En 10 ans, celui-ci y programmera 32 premières d'opéra et 52 reprises. Dès le début de son règne, la presse salue la qualité et la force du musicien, mais se montre quelque peu discordante à l'égard de l'homme. À Vienne, Mahler se fait de nouveaux amis, et notamment les artistes du groupe de la Sécession, qui explorent eux aussi de nouveaux territoires. Parmi eux, il y a Alma, une étudiante en musique de 22 ans, fille du peintre Emil Schindler. Il en tombe amoureux et l'épouse en 1902 à la Karlskirche. Le compositeur a alors 41 ans. L'année suivante naît leur premier enfant, Maria, suivi un an plus tard de Anna. Mahler les adore. Sa vie est remplie comme jamais, des vacances d'été consacrées à la composition et des tournées comme chef d'orchestre à travers l'Europe, pendant lesquelles il joue parfois ses propres symphonies. Puis, en 1907, un triple drame s'abat sur lui en quelques semaines. C'est d'abord sa fille Maria qui meurt de diphtérie à l'âge de 5 ans. Puis un médecin diagnostique chez lui une faiblesse cardiaque congénitale. Enfin, les intrigues de l'Opéra de Vienne prennent une telle ampleur qu'il démissionne. Mahler accepte alors une invitation de New York, où il dirige pendant 2 ans l'opéra au Metropolitan et des concerts au Carnegie Hall. Chaque été, il revient en Europe pour composer, mais désormais à Toblach, où il a fait construire une nouvelle maison d'été. C'est là notamment qu'il compose la 9e symphonie, le Chant de la Terre, et la 10e symphonie qui restera inachevée. À la fin de l'année 1910, il retourne à New York pour une 3e saison, mais sa santé se détériore. En 1911, il est pris d'un malaise après un concert et décide de rentrer à Vienne, où il meurt le 18 mai.
Long ago, in what now seems another life, we started out in our search for Mahler's musical roots by trying to define that delicate balance between the earthly life of the ghetto and the heavenly life of the Christian promise, between Mahler, the last heir to the great German symphonic tradition, and Mahler, the intensely personal prophet. This search of ours has been illuminated by our investigation of these marvelous Knaben Wunderhorn songs in which so much essential Mahler personality is buried, and out of which he fashioned so much of his symphonic music. What's so especially fascinating about it all is that in spite of the fact that Mahler never actually quoted any of these songs after his 4th symphony, the spirit of the songs remains musically inherent in all the half-dozen symphonies that followed, and in countless different ways. For instance, there's a constant preoccupation with folklore elements, folk melodies, rustic dances, or Ländler. Then there is inevitably, sooner or later, an invocation of the Lutheran chorale, or else of a dizzily sardonic dance with the devil, all of which are to be found in the Wunderhorn songs and in every symphony he ever wrote. But more striking than all of these was his unyielding obsession with death. That little drummer boy persists to the very last note he ever composed. In fact, Mahler's obsession with death throughout his creative life is without parallel in any other composer I can think of. His 9th symphony, for instance, actually opens with the halting, irregular beats of his own diseased heart. think of any other composer who wrote in every major work at some point or other a funeral march? In the First Symphony, there is that mock funeral march we already know about. In the Second Symphony, the entire opening movement is entitled Funeral March on the death of a hero. And in the Third Symphony, and in the Fourth Symphony. And in the Fifth Symphony. And in the Sixth Symphony. And in the Seventh Symphony. And in the Eighth Symphony. And again in the Ninth, those doom-laden, faltering heartbeats we heard earlier eventually reach shattering proportions. What has this lifelong obsession with death got to do with our further understanding of Mahler's very personal genius, or for that matter, of his Jewishness? Just this, that it's very difficult to be a Jew. As we say, es ist schwer zu sein ein Yid. Judaism is the hardest of all religions because there are no ultimate rewards except on earth. No promises about the hereafter, no guaranteed kingdom of heaven, only the conviction that God will love you if you do his works. Judaism is not primarily a consolation. It is a system of ethics with not 10 but hundreds of commandments about how man should live with man. Therefore, the great attraction of Christianity to Mahler was the concept of resurrection of the soul, the promise of life hereafter. Auferstehen, rise again, resurrection. In the excitement of discovering Christianity, there must have been some rejection of Jewishness early on, going all the way back to Mahler's childhood memory of singing in the church choir and getting his first whiff of heaven. This is why for the rest of his life he kept re-invoking that childlike purity of spirit, which was, to put it coarsely, his ticket to the afterlife. Sometimes this Christian yearning of his was expressed in massed choirs and with huge orchestral forces. At other times, it appeared in literally childlike form, as in the singing of the children's choir in the Third Symphony, or again in the Eighth. To say nothing of the two wonderfully innocent songs we have listened to, Urlicht from the Second Symphony and The Heavenly Life in the Fourth. All these movements attest to an incredible simplicity at the core of Mahler's music. And in the end, in his final great works, Mahler's music became even more simple, more spare, and less specifically Christian. Consider, for example, these 5 notes. Different notes. What can be simpler than this pure pentatonic scale? And yet this is the opening of one of Mahler's most arresting melodies from his final vocal masterpiece, the Song of the Earth. We've come a long way from those early Knabenwunderhorn songs to this greatest of his song cycles, Das Lied von der Erde, the Song of the Earth, a symphony really, for 2 solo voices and orchestra, the last song of which is a profoundly introspective, utterly quiet, almost Zen-like contemplation of death. For years, this Zen-like aspect of Mahler's music was not understood by some of the world's greatest musicians, conductors and composers included. It seemed to them oversimplified, so bleak, so devoid of harmonic support. But actually, this is the true essence of Mahler in his maturity. Not the overblown, over-harmonized chorale music, or the over-contrapuntal academic fugues, but this stunning quietude and sparseness. This is the musical equivalent of what Zarathustra, Buddha, Bergson, Wagner, Nietzsche called variously the all, the nothing, the élan vital, the cosmic Om. What has happened is that Mahler's music, at its greatest and most mature, has become a synthesis of his lifelong conflict between Judaism on the one hand and Christianity on the other, which makes it clear to us why Mahler chose for these final song texts ancient Chinese poetry, which concerns itself with youth, beauty, wine, the brevity of life, and the mystical embrace of death. In these last pages of this extraordinary final song, the Abschied, or the farewell, it's as if Mahler is sadly witnessing the passing of his beloved C major world, unwilling to let go, repeating over and over an unresolved C major phrase on the words ewig, ewig, forever, forever. And one other thing remains unchanged in Mahler's music. The little drummer boy, that death-condemned spirit, which is still with us to the end, still atoning, though in another musical idiom, for some long-forgotten offense. It's almost inevitable that this last farewell song we are about to hear should be ushered in by that one invariable, a funeral march. One constant that stamped every one